this week on AK Podcast.
And they were having some success on the surface where they saw, hey, these calves are actually, they're, hitting puberty maybe a month earlier. We're lower in age at first calving. But then when they came into first lactation, they were producing like 2,000, 2,500 pounds less milk, right? And we realized that black box, if we tinker with things and screw with things too much, we can really cause a lot of damage.
You know you're a hay nerd when you walk into a hay barn and you just love that smell.
Doggone it, I gotta put more corn in. I'm gonna have to add some soybean meal. Wow, did that cost you a lot of money?
Put yourself in a crowded elevator and the elevator stops because, I don't know, the building's on fire.
I really like to ask them what's important to them.
We're here for the cow. She's giving us all the profits we need to maintain these facilities and buildings and employees. Man, let's take care of her.
Roadway, I would call it more as a roundabout. And it's kind of like a weird analogy where we're, as farmers, farming and raising these livestock up, and then themselves are kind of have their own, herd of microbes in their gut that they're raising up.
I have two great passions in my life. The one is people, and the second is cows. And I want to get the best out of them.
Hello, and welcome to AK Podcast, where we explore science and nutrition behind livestock care and management with the best and the brightest in the business. I'm your host, Chris Radke, part of the sales department here at Agri-King. And with me today is a director of field services and a member of the field management team, Mr. Mike Donaldson. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Outstanding, Chris. Having a good day so far. How's everything in your world?
Fantastic. Here we have Mr. Adam back with us, so I'm excited to hear what he has to say with us.
Like Chris said, we've got Dr. Adam Geiger joining us in our continuing series on calves and heifers. Adam, I'll have you give as much of an introduction as you want in case someone's joining us for the first time, and then we'll jump right into this next step on profitable and successful calf and heifer raising.
Hey, I'm just a guy that likes calves. I've been blessed to work with a lot of them in a lot of different places, and just really enjoy that the things that we do with our calves and heifers can really have a prolonged and profound impact on the longevity and the profitability of our herd. It's an area we're learning a lot more about. Our knowledge base has really increased over the last decade, maybe a little more. And it's just a really fun and exciting area. And just love calves.
Well, let me ask you something as we get started, because you do an outstanding job of just making me curious and think. Why? And I think you're absolutely right. In the last however many years, but I'm going to say 10 or 20 years, there's been an increased emphasis on calves and heifers. But it's been hundreds of years that we have dairied, that we have had dairy cows. What do you think has led to the increased emphasis in the relatively recent past on
Mike,
calves and heifers?
People are going to think that I paid you for that, because I don't think I could have teed up a better sort of introduction if I had wanted to. It's funny, right? Because we're really heading into what I call the first black box of calf and heifer rearing, right? Okay, we weaned you, right? And we spent a bunch of time talking about how to wean calves successfully, how to get them to that weaning process, keeping them healthy. Started with colostrum and all the way to how we formulate feed, how we feed them milk, all that fun stuff. And then typically it's like, okay, you're weaned. We'll see you again when it's time to breed. Well, this whole idea of more emphasis being placed on calves and heifers really did, believe it or not, start with this black box in a way. And so if you think back to how we raise calves and heifers, especially in the U.S., where we like to do things quickly and efficiently, it's always been thought that, hey, there's always this stance that, calves, they don't make us money. right? So we've got to get them through to first calving as efficiently, as quickly as possible. And that even then spilled over into, like we talked about last time, right? Weaning them quickly because milk is more expensive than grain, all that fun stuff. But the idea all came from, hey, this animal's not going to make me any money till she calves in and starts making milk, right? And so that's not going to happen till age at first calving of 22 to 24 months of age. And so this idea started maybe 20 years ago, a little more, where, well, hey, maybe if we tried to shorten that age and lower that age at first calving, shorten that non-productive period, maybe we can start making money on these girls quicker, right? And so that started with, okay, once they're weaned, right, let's grow them. Because if we want them to, right, if we want them to calve in quicker, we've got to breed them quicker, right? Well, if we want to breed them quicker, they got to hit puberty quicker.
Yeah.
Right? Well, they're going to hit puberty at 45 to 50% of their mature body weight, and then they're going to be bred at 55 to 60% of their mature body weight, right? And what people don't realize, though, is that, or didn't realize then, was that getting them to hit puberty, that's 100% correlated almost to body weight. Right? When they hit that 45 to 50% of mature body weight, they will start cycling, right? So if you want them to calve earlier, you got to breed them earlier. If you want them to breed them earlier, they got to hit puberty earlier. Well, if you want them to hit puberty earlier, they got to hit that weight earlier. So people started pushing growth from weaning until breeding, essentially. And they were having some success on the surface where they saw, hey, these calves are actually, they're hitting puberty maybe a month earlier. We're lower in age at first calving. But then when they came into first lactation, they were producing like 2,000, 2,500 pounds less milk, right? And we realized that black box, if we tinker with things and screw with things too much, we can really cause a lot of damage. So then that's when the shift focused to the first 60 to 90 days with milk, like we've talked about in previous episodes, right? And that's where some of this calf and intensive calf research really started to take off and explode a little bit. And then that's led into all sorts of other things and discoveries too. But so, kudos to you, Mike. That was you teed me up really nicely there. But, that's one way in which it really kind of started.
Okay, because I mean, ages ago, and I think the whole world, whether they do it well or poorly, has moved past a 3-year-old having her first calf. But there was a time when that wasn't unheard of. I mean, 2.5 to 3 years. And I remember at one point thinking, well, as long as I was buying her 2 months before she calved, I didn't care how old she was because I didn't spend the money to raise her. But I mean, I remember at one point 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when it was discussed about trying to get them all the way down to calving, barely grown up big enough to have a calf, and you didn't get any milk. But if a 16, 17-month-old animal could give you 12,000 pounds, it was more than you got during the time you only fed her. And that seemed to come and go rather quickly. But like you say, that whole race to start getting milk out of them at times veered into some pretty bad areas, or at least not good long-term
and
areas.
That's really changed. I wouldn't say changed, but that's really brought into focus again how we take care of these heifers, because the key after they're weaned. So number one, it's a black box for two reasons. A lot of times they get put out on the back 40 and we don't look at them. But the other reason it's a black box is we don't know a lot, right? We're still learning a lot about how there's not a lot of people out there that can successfully feed these calves and heifers. And if we do it wrong, we can cause a lot of damage, right? And typically the way that starts to show up as damage is you'll see these girls just accumulating way too much condition.
Do you think, and I realize we're a ration balancing company, we're not in favor of this approach, but in a world that feeds so much corn silage and farms between corn silage and their own corn grain, energy is perceived as a lower cost ingredient compared to protein. Is that made the problem worse just because I've got corn salads. I'm going to fill them up on mostly corn salads. And no, I'm not buying soybean meal to balance that out. And we wind up making that fat issue
potentially.
worse.
And the other thing we get is these girls are a lot of times great candidates for refusals as well, right? So if you've got extra from your high cal pen or whatever pen, they might end up with those girls as well. But that kind of opens up a whole can of worms. So yeah, I think that's part of it. Another thing is rarely, I'll use that word lightly, rarely, but a lot of times, these girls aren't being fed a well-balanced vitamin and trace mineral pack, right? So maybe their VTMs are coming from the refusals they're getting, or they're not really being supplemented at all. Maybe there's a block or a tub out there somewhere, depending where they're at, or maybe we just don't have a handle on that. So you've also got this micronutrient perspective of it as well. And then we bring in the fiber thing as well, right? Because if you remember when we were talking and we started to dive into this a little bit with calf starters, but it really becomes a big area of emphasis here is if these girls are getting to over condition, that's where fiber can really become our friend. We can add in some more, some hay, things like that, because they can only eat 1% of their body weight daily as NDF. Right. So, I mean, typically the amount of forage they're getting is increasing with time, but a lot of times we feed them maybe a little bit lower fiber diet than we should. And so they're eating more than they should. And then you've got all that energy in there, like you alluded to, and that's when they can start to accumulate some of that excessive condition.
Well, let's go back to we've got this calf weaned. Pick it up from where you were last time. Let's talk about some concepts and ideas about how we ought to be doing this. We've kind of kicked around why it's done incorrectly. Let's talk about the right way to do it.
I'm a physiologist by training, and my background is in the mammary glands, so I kind of nerd out on that. And so that's kind of where I like to focus a little bit, because I think it's really key in this period to focus on that. So, we've really talked about transitioning them into this period correctly, doing it over time, not making too many changes at once. And if you'll recall from that pre-weaning portion, we really spent a lot of time focusing about how if we can grow these girls better, they will end up producing more milk for us in the long run. Well, this stage, it's a little bit the opposite. That first 60 to 90 days is really important for udder development because it's growing so much faster than the rest of the body. Well, the period from 3 months until puberty, or when she starts, essentially when she's pregnant, is also super important for reasons we don't completely understand yet. But because we know that puberty is associated with body weight, if we grow her too fast during this time, she just spends less time in this really important period, right? We just push her through this period of mammary growth that's really important. And you've probably heard the term fatty udder, right? We grow her too fast, she'll accumulate a lot of fat in the udder. This is really that period we're talking about from weaning until breeding. And so I really get hung up on focusing on what our gains are during this time, and using gains in body condition. Not all body condition is bad, but using gain in body condition to help us determine how we're doing here, right? Certainly it's pretty easy to grow them during this phase because of the amount of energy we can offer them. But it's also very easy to grow them too fast, right? So that's why when I'm looking at the data, right, I'm looking at my average daily gains, and typically we talk about it in terms of kilos, but 2.2 pounds, right? So that's kind of getting to be the upper end, right? 2.2 pounds a day. So typically when I'm working with my guys, especially my bigger guys, I'm going to start to ask them, okay, what percentage of your girls are growing over 2.2 pounds per day during this period? And which percentage of them are growing over 2.5 pounds per day? When I start to see that number increase, I don't really have a threshold for it, but when I start to see that number increase, that tells me that we're starting to, and I'm using body condition too, we're starting to accumulate too much condition, and that's where we're going to see compromised milk yield and first lactation. And the other part of this is, we're trying to grow them, but not grow them too aggressively, not growing too much fat, putting too much fat on them. And we're trying to get them to hit, 45 to 50% of their mature body weight to start cycling, and then 55 to 60% of mature body weight when we breed them. Well, we've talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
How many dairymen actually know what their mature body weight is? So 55% of what?
Well, yeah. I mean, and knowing what your cull cows have been going out at is only a partial answer, because you've probably added enough weight back onto them. You need to, I mean, if you're selling 1,550 pound culls, that really isn't their mature body weight. You're going to need to adjust that by a couple 100 pounds, whatever. I mean, whatever you think they've packed back on, just because you milked them so they didn't pay
and we'll
anymore.
talk about this next time too, but that carries all the way into first calving, right? Because you're going to want her to calve in at 85, 87, 89% of her mature body weight at that first calving. Well, I was dealing with a herd overseas one time, and they were sitting right at 85% of their mature body weight when they calved in. Well, they were weighing them a couple days before calving. So they had an 85-pound calf in there, 15, 20, 30 pounds of placenta and placental fluid weight. So when we actually did the math, it was like 79%.
Yeah.
And so, that data and those numbers becomes really, really important.
Well, it immediately, to me, points to a major flaw in most people's facilities, that we aren't designing anything. We're really good at knowing how much a cow milks. I mean, we've got milk weight right in the parlor. We've got components. We're doing a really bad job of designing facilities that give us that aspect of average daily gain, body weight at breeding. How many of the farms you work with have designed a facility that includes scales and gives you that? And when you're not getting it, what's the best
I
you can
wouldn't
do
say that
without
they've
them?
necessarily designed the facilities to include scales. I mean, a lot of guys I work with are getting weights, at least at birth, hutch exit, maybe, 1 or 2, a 6-month weight, things like that. And they're pulling the scale in and running them across the scale or something. Or maybe it's just trailer weights when they're moving them around.
Okay.
Very little guys that I work with have a facility designed to measure the weights of their lactating cows. But if I can give one takeaway kind of from the first portion of our discussion is get that number. And it can be as easy as putting a scale in the return alley for, borrowing a scale from somebody. A lot of folks have them, a lot of, local co-ops, et cetera, have them, put it in the return alley and just leave it there for 3 days. And after one of your milkings each day, just get the weights of everything walking across that scale. If we can get all of our animals and kind of look at the ones that are, 100 days in milk or so, you're going to get a pretty good handle on your second, third, and fourth lactation weights. And that's going to, help making decisions and benchmarking and objectives for these heifers a lot easier. And then, of course, it's not just a weight thing either when we talk about breeding, right? There's a height component to it as well. We got to make sure she's accumulated enough frame to support the pregnancy as well.
And going back then for the heifer aspect, it sounds like the most commonly done thing would be to put a trailer across scales, know you've got 15 heifers on it. They're all X number of months old, and that becomes what you're achieving at that point.
Yeah. Trailer weights
that makes sense.
I mean, they're certainly better than nothing. They're going to help us to make decisions.
Okay. So from a nutritional standpoint, as we go from that post-calving up to puberty and breeding, you've talked about keeping some things in balance. You mentioned the VTM micronutrient part. Expand on some of those things. What are some of the other areas that are commonly not handled correctly?
Yeah, I think, having a well-formulated VTM is really important. And I think that's one that if we want to go into more detail at some point, we in another webinar or folks that are interested in learning more about that can reach out to myself or others. But certainly, I'm focusing a lot in that period on my zinc levels and my manganese levels. I'm also focusing really heavy to make sure that there's some iodine in there, and then all of my vitamins that they're where they need to be. But the other thing with this too is when we talk about a VTM and I think you've heard me mention this a few times, test the water in your heifers, right? That water source is typically a pretty neglected water source. And I mean, I just saw some water results from the northeastern USA not too long ago where we had some bacteria in it, sky high iron. We had all these different things that were going to really, the VTM might have been balanced okay, but it didn't really matter because there were so many antagonists in there that they probably weren't going to absorb any of it anyways. So water testing, I'd say, is another important thing. I think I mentioned it in a few other episodes, and if I haven't, shame on me. But test your water every 2 months or twice a year.
No, you have. You've been
but then,
I mean, obviously, right along.
As these animals are heading towards breeding, they're going to transition onto a more of a TMR-based approach, and that's going to typically happen around 5 to 6 months. I think I see a lot of guys trying to do that around 4 months. That depending on how well they've done up to this point, that might be pushing it. But if it's a TMR with some of the grain still, then we might be okay. Again, making sure they transition well. The biggest issue we run into is that those guys that maybe weren't following some of the recommendations we alluded to with the calf starter, so it's a really high starch, and then they switch them to a TMR pretty quickly. You can see things go pretty haywire as a result of that. So it comes down to the transition, which will be pretty specific to the farm, but certainly we see the amount of protein we're feeding starting to decrease, as you alluded to, but also just because the requirements for protein are going down a little bit. We're going to see typically energy is supposed to obviously decrease as well because we don't want to get them too fat. And then we're using fiber, so our NDF is going to start to go up over time as well as we're incorporating more forages and things like that. And typically, the way we formulate diets for calves and for heifers in this black box really depends on what we have available too, because, I think you could ask just about any dairy that you've worked with. I doubt that the weaned heifers are a candidate for their highest quality feedstuffs.
I was just going to get to that. All right. So I don't hear it as much anymore, but there used to be a subclass of forages called heifer hay. And basically it was something that, when Brett Mortensen from out west for Agri-King was on, he talked about that sometimes hay was whatever couldn't outrun the baler. And that was kind of what heifer hay became. It was, it was full headed out Timothy, and it was pretty rank stuff. Talking first about forage quality, what would you like to see people allocating to their heifers in terms of quality forage?
I'm a realist, right? We're going to be feeding them some of the lower quality forages that we have when in between weaning, and then certainly once they become pregnant, which we're going to talk a little bit more about next time. I don't have key metrics that I follow for forage quality in these girls because I do realize that we're going to kind of feed what we have available, but we have to make sure that we're still getting the growth that we need during that period. And so because there's so much variation between farm and what's available and what they're using, the number one thing that I'm focusing on in this period is keeping these girls healthy, right? Because I realize in a lot of instances they're going to be receiving a suboptimal diet, or maybe not suboptimal, but they're not going to be receiving the forages that are reserved for our lactating cows.
So you're basically saying we need a good diet regardless of the things that go into it from a forage standpoint.
But most importantly,
okay,
keeping them healthy through this process, right? And when I think about keeping them healthy, I really focus on three key diseases that can rear their ugly head during this period. So, if you want to go into that, we can.
Okay. No, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know when we're going to record the next episode, and I hate to be on pins and needles for weeks trying to figure out what those three might be. So, go ahead into that. That'd be great.
Let me ask you: when you hear I'm having issues with my heifers, maybe around 3-4 months of age, which disease typically comes to mind?
Well, I'm not. And just for the rest of you to understand, we don't practice nothing on this. So he asked me questions and I'm completely unqualified or prepared to answer them. I don't know if it qualifies as a single disease. I think the first thing I go to is our lung issues, things like pneumonia, air quality. That would be where my mind goes first on this side.
Yeah, that's the first one, right?
All right.
And so, yeah, typically it's pneumonia or respiratory disease, right? And if we think about why that happens, right, when they're weaned, they're typically still on bedding of some sort, right, because they still have a high surface area relative to their body mass, so they need some insulation of some sort. But they're also urinating and defecating a lot more than they were when they were little, right? And they're also in our black box, so we're probably not checking on them as often, which means bedding management may also be a suboptimal, right? And so we can see a lot of airborne bacteria beginning to accumulate in these environments, right? So this is where environmental management becomes really, really important. I run around with ammonia strips on farm, right? Because ammonia is a really good indicator of airborne bacteria. And so I'm testing environmental quality to help us determine how airflow is, how bedding management is, things like that. And so those strips will give you a number from 0 to probably 100. When we get up into the 30s and 40s, think poultry house, right? But our goal is to be less than 5 parts per million ammonia in the air. Because when we exceed 5, we lose feed efficiency.
Okay.
When we exceed 10, average daily gain is compromised, and our risk of respiratory disease doubles. Unfortunately, I see a lot of 20s, right? So these calves are exposed to air contaminants. They're breathing it in day after day, and then that's where respiratory disease can really rear its ugly head. And so then this is almost an entire different topic, but because respiratory disease can be so prevalent, right, that is where we start to then talk about, well, what are our culling criteria for our heifers on farm? Because not every calf deserves to become a cow, unfortunately, right? And we know that the incidences with respiratory disease are, number one, going to compromise your gain pretty significantly and make it harder to achieve our objectives. Number two, we know that once we hit a certain level of lung damage from inhalation of ammonia, things like that, the lung damage becomes irreversible. And number three, we know that every needle stick for respiratory disease, regardless of how severe it is essentially going to take off 25 days from her accumulated days of milk, right? So every time we stick her with a needle, regardless of severity, she is decreasing the number of days she's ultimately going to spend in our herd, right? And so every day matters when we go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, Mike, about understanding our rearing costs and things like that. But then we also know that just sticking her for a treatment once is also going to drop 500 to 1,000 pounds off first lactation, right? So now we've got a less productive animal that's going to be in the herd longer because of a result of our inability to keep her healthy early on.
what I think the way this works is if I ask this question, I won't be asked this question myself. So what are the second and third diseases you're really focused on at this
Lameness.
point?
And then, believe it or not, mastitis.
All right. I saw the second one coming. I probably would have got that right. I would have fanned horribly on mastitis being an issue with 6 and 10-month-old animals.
That one is going to be our bridge that works into our next one, because that one can start early, but it really rears its ugly head as we get closer to first calving. But to wrap up the conversation around respiratory disease and air quality, right? When we're dealing with those issues, typically, another question for you, typically what's the first thing you hear is like, well, let's make this change, or let's do this to try to help with our respiratory disease. See if you can go 3 for 3.
I think probably the first, I think the most common thing is they address air movement before they address any of the other aspects. I mean, you and in fairness, you kind of teed this one up by talking about the importance, the role bedding plays, the way things like that. I think the first issue is, well, we need to drop the curtains earlier. We need to put fans in. As they aren't as typically first looking at any of the other issues that create bad air. They're more trying to introduce
3
good
for 3.
air.
That's
fair?
usually the first one that people say is, well, we just got to increase air movement. Which, sure, we can do that, right? We need 4 air changes per hour just to, the air needs to change every 15 minutes just to keep it fresh. But where are we measuring that, right? Measuring it in the feed alley doesn't do us a lot of good. We need to be measuring that at the calf level. But there's actually some really great data that came out of the University of Wisconsin where they were looking at essentially decreasing air contamination, which one way you could do that was with air speed. But, again, where are our dead spots? What's that look like? But the one thing that study found was that by providing more dry, clean bedding, they reduced the prevalence of respiratory disease by 30%. So just from
bedding, doing the bedding
right?
correctly,
and then bedding type becomes a concern as well. Not trying to throw stones at anything here, but one bedding that I can see in some parts of the world in the U.S. is rice hulls, and rice hulls are pretty notorious for not absorbing the moisture and pulling the contaminants out of the air. So we can see some issues there, but using things like ammonia strips, I ought to be a rep for them. They're $7 off Amazon. They're really cost effective. You can use them 200 times. I don't have any with me. I'll show them. I'll bring them for the next one and hold them up. But a super cheap little tool that you can use, and you could just go out there every day, and it can help you determine when to make those bedding changes and things like that. And then, of course, stocking rates and seasonality plays a role there as well.
So then that in turn leads to the environment that goes towards the lameness and hoof troubles, correct?
Lameness can start a lot earlier than we think, right? And that's an area. I'm a certified hoof trimmer. That's an area I've focused on a lot. I enjoy it because I'm a nerd, but that's okay. I embrace it. There's really 3 main lesions we deal with in terms of lameness, right? The big 3. There's sole ulcers and white lines, which those are mechanical, right? That's damage that comes from, the environment or the housing or something. And then the other one would be digital dermatitis or hairy heel warts, right? Now, that one's not mechanical. That one's an infectious lesion, right? And so we certainly can see some mechanical lesions, but probably not in heifers this young. That's probably going to happen as we get closer to first calving. But what we can see is I've seen digital dermatitis start to rear its ugly head, I would say 6 months of age in some farms, right? And the issue with that is it's an infectious lesion. So once one heifer in that pen's got it, They probably all have it. But the other thing we need to understand is the pathogen that causes digital dermatitis. What it does, how it impacts the animals. It actually burrows into the back of the foot, between the dew claws and the hoof, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes its home. And once it's there, it is essentially with the animal for life. She may have it dormant, but she's going to constantly have recurring, digital dermatitis or hairy heelwort episodes. And so I'll go back to my poultry house example, right? When we have air ammonia levels that are in the 30s and 40s, in some aggressive situations in poultry houses, you'll see lesions around the eyes in birds because that ammonia will actually break down the skin. That's what causes pneumonia, right? They inhale it and it breaks down the lung tissue. Well, if we're not managing bedding correctly, or say we're using slatted floors where a lot of gases are coming up through the slats, the air ammonia level down at the hoof level can be 30, 40 parts per million, no problem. So now you weaken the skin, and if that pathogen's present, it's going to burrow in. I've seen 6, 7, 8-month-old heifer pens where 95% of those heifers have digital dermatitis. Mm-hmm.
Really? When that isn't a group you even think about putting across a table. I mean, they're not supposed to have problems there. That black box approach you talk about. I don't know how
and I
often
mean, you
it's
can
even
walk
being
through the
looked at.
flashlight, you can see it pretty well, and we're not going to put them across the table, right? Probably not until they're getting closer. There's a lot of guys that will trim them, before they enter the herd for the first time, before first calving, and that's where maybe our mechanical lesions will show up, which we'll talk about next time. But it comes down to kind of 3 things that we can do to help them, because you're not going to run them through a footpath either, are you?
No, well, that's probably where some of this starts, at least with a group of lactating cows. 2 or 3 times a day, they leave the environment they're living in. They go to the parlor, and most people's daily work schedule, unless you're flushing, which is great too, but you are at that point scraping the alleys. You're cleaning their environment up because they're not there, and you don't. Once again, unless you're flushing, you don't have that easy time that heifers aren't occupying the area you need to clean.
And so, I mean, they're not leaving their pen. We're not foot bathing them, and we're not looking at their feet very often. So, for us, it comes down to bedding management and trying to keep those feet and legs clean, because if there's a lot of ammonia there combined with them being caked with manure, our issues are just going to be magnified. And then it comes back to that VTM conversation. Our only defense against the lameness issues and that digital dermatitis is to provide a well-fortified diet. And so the 3 that I've alluded to, minerals that I really focus on that period for prevention of disease are zinc, because zinc helps strengthen the skin. Iodine, which will help us with the immune response. And then, shame on me, I forgot to mention this earlier, but manganese, and that one's more for the respiratory disease. Zinc is very important for lung strength too, but a lot of people don't realize that manganese is very critical for mucus production in the lungs. So that's going to help us deal with the ammonia and deal with the pathogens. Actually, I was doing a lot of work in Australia back in like 2018, 2019, whatever year the wildfires happened over there. Yeah, and we tripled the manganese levels in the sites closest to the burns, and we saw significant. And this is all anecdotal, nothing official, but we saw significant improvements in those herds that we upped the manganese in.
Okay, well, we've got them up. And I hope that the people who are listening to this have a great relationship with their vet, with an AI company. I don't think it needs to be the province of Agri-King to tell you, other than having an animal ready to get pregnant, this is the sync program to be on. This is how to do this. But I do want to have us at least mention, because first breeding is a thing. We're talking about that as being a benchmark. What would you recommend? I'm one of your clients. what things have you wanted to tune me up on to get these heifers pregnant before you're infringing on actual vet AI animal breeding type companies? Because I don't like it when they pretend to be nutritionists, so I don't want to pretend to be a breeding guy. That's where I am.
Always do the disclaimer, not a vet, right? So I don't make vaccine recommendations because that's I don't want to get into a conflict there. But I'll look at the protocol and I'll make sure that they have a healthy relationship with their vet, and that they're that if they're having issues with a certain sort of respiratory disease, that they're reviewing those protocols with their vet. What I'm looking at is, for me, it really comes down to condition of those girls is a big part of what I'm looking at, and I'm looking at a lot of the transitions that got us to that point, and the pen movements and the environments that those animals are in, and I'm tuning those up, and then I'm making sure, because I'm not the one breeding the cows, I'm not selling semen, I'm not I'm not recommending protocols, but what I do know is that not every girl on that farm deserves to get bred, right? So are we doing a good job of getting rid of some of the heifers that we don't need on farm, that maybe have been treated 2 or 3 times and have been held back in a pen or something because they're not growing effectively? That's going to make your breeding protocol that much more successful. It's going to make your guys on the AI side of things probably a lot happier too. But that becomes fine tuning a bit more with the farm, because it depends on, okay, we need to understand, what percentage of their heifers, or what percentage of their animals in general are they breeding to for replacements versus dairy beef, for example. What's their replacement inventory look like? So that those, what's their culling rate in the adult cattle, right? So we understand what sort of replacement inventory we need. So that becomes a little bit more complicated. But what I can say is, because of the very nice price of our dairy beef calves right now, there are a number of guys out there that tend to toe the line. So we don't have the luxury of maybe culling some of these poor doer girls that we wanted to. So that's where keeping them healthy and in managing that environment and not letting them get fat on us becomes that much more important. Sorry, that was really long. That was...
No. No, because I mean, it's important that we reflect where we are right now. And I have never seen the beef and bull calf, dairy on beef calf market impact a dairy's bottom line in such a major way and for such an extended period of time as what we're going through right now. I mean, it is dramatic, and we need to be realistic about what we're looking at.
Exactly. And that's where some of these little things, understanding your mature body weight, right? Understanding what that diet looks like, and that you've got a well-fortified VTM in it. Understanding your true cost of getting an animal to first lactation. All those things become that much more important if we're the further we start to push things towards breeding for these black calves,
Well, I think we've moved through that first of the black box areas that Adam talked about. And we've got ourselves well positioned for a final push to the finish with regard to that last black box, and the day that, the 22 to 24 months after she drops onto the ground, that she gives us a calf and enters the milking herd. Any other wrap-up thoughts about this time we've just talked about, post-weaning to an animal being bred, getting pregnant?
I always kind of make the joke that it's that calves and heifers are a little bit more of an art than a science at times. And if we apply that to young calves, it's pretty beautiful, well-defined art, right? We've got it pretty dialed in. It's a bit more abstract once we get them past that point. But I think I think as we head into this next one, we kind of teed it up. We're going to talk a little bit about this lameness thing some more, and then head into the conversation around mastitis. And that's when things come full circle too, because now she's pregnant. So the way we manage her is going to start the cycle over again for that next newborn. But I think understanding the environment, paying attention to the environment of these heifers is really important, right? Let's not let a low-hanging fruit, compromise the whole system. Test the water and get that mature body weight figured out, right? So we can start to really dial things in so we can be as efficient with our rearing program as possible, whether that means, hey, we can push a few more towards dairy beef breeding, or maybe we can't, but starting to dial in some of those things and get a better idea on some of that information is going to become really important, for making decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's perfect. With that, Chris, what'd you pick up today? What'd you learn, buddy?
My big takeaways are, I guess Adam's three key diseases to be on the lookout for was the respiratory or pneumonia, lameness, and mastitis. And then maybe this is a ridiculous question, but Adam, how do you, like, when you go on a farm, how would you convince somebody like the old time, like quote unquote, Mike calls like the old time farmer who's kind of done things the way he's always done, to see what you see? Does that make sense? Like, you walk on, you see these things, but you can't just say, shove in his face, hey, you're doing all this wrong. So, like, how can you baby step him to a better farm?
That's a loaded question. Depends on the guy.
What was your... Like, well, I don't, like, you just pointed out all these things like that I would think you'd see right away when you
the
walk
way
on
I
a farm.
do it is I typically,
how do you...
I'm never just going to look at the post-weed heifers, right? So I'm typically walking the whole thing. So, start with birth and colostrum and walk my way through. And I'm looking for low-hanging fruit, and I'm looking for things that we can do that aren't going to cost us a lot, right? So bedding management in heifers, right, is one that we might be. I'm not going to throw 15 changes at a guy on the first visit, right? Because then that's my only visit. But pick out 2 or 3 things that are low-hanging fruit and a good one and things that you can provide data on that day. So that's why I like the ammonia strips, because I can show them, hey, you know what? This is a common issue I see. Don't single them out. This is a common issue I see. We've got a ton of ammonia here. We manage this environment. We're going to see, respiratory disease rates decrease. We should see better growth, better breeding. And so if you can make 3 or 4 of those recommendations, provide some data to them on that day, and a couple recommendations that aren't going to break the bank or be extremely labor intensive, and he can see the results from that, well, then the next time you show up, now you've got his attention, right? And now you're going to be able to dive even deeper, and you've built trust and really take it to the next level. So I'm not sure if that even answers your question.
No, it does. I can see, like, you've got this vast knowledge, and I think what you want to do, you want to help them all right there, but you can't dump that truck on, all that knowledge on them right then, because it's like you said.
Right. Well, I always use the example. I do a lot with the Dairy Challenge program, and I used to be a judge. I forget which year it was, but they have to evaluate college kids evaluate a dairy farm. It's like the best program. I love it, Dairy Challenge. But they evaluate this farm, and then they give a presentation to a panel of judges and the dairy producers in the room. I'll never forget one year, a kid came in and his recommendation was to build a new barn. It's like, well, that's expensive, and right. So you've got to use. And again, I love that program because it helps those students understand. And I did the program, right, and I made some crazy recommendations, and it helps you tune your approach and things like that. But right, what are the things we can do that move the needle? Because eventually you're going to run out of those things, right? And that's when we can get into some of the higher cost stuff. But you've got to exhaust some of your other options first.
Laughing. I mean, I could not agree more with how outstanding the Dairy Challenge program is. I mean, I'm lucky enough to go to an awful lot of them as part of Agri-King's people that attend, and I've never been a judge. I love being a mentor, but it is so it might be the only time Adam didn't really cover it. It is so fun to see 18, 19-year-old kid who is technically deadly accurate. This is exactly what that farm really needs, and it ain't gonna happen. I mean, and it's nice because the judges, like what Adam's been, do almost a loving and kind job of saying to that team, yes, that's a good observation, but it ain't going to happen. They don't use those words. And the idea of, okay, they need to build a new barn, but if they were to put more fans in this barn and sprinklers at the feed bunk, we could do better. You're never supposed to use the word better when you're judging animals, but it's not a big problem to use when you're in Dairy Challenge. And to say, we would be better off if tomorrow we did this. Sometimes I've seen kids win. I've seen teams win when they did things like, you need to clean the grates on your fans. The guards on your fans have got so much dust over them, there's no air going through them.
That's another good point about heifers and pneumonia.
Yeah. You may have all the right tools, and if you're using them wrong, it's not going to make the difference it could make. So, no, that's a great observation.
Well, thanks, Adam. You can find us on just about any social. You find us out, search us out. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching us on. And if you have any thoughts or questions or follow-up questions, you can go to email us at podcast@agriking.com. Mike and Adam, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time. Thanks for your insight, Adam.